Well, there's an enchanted tiki bar outside the Disneyland Hotel. It's pretty spectacular.
That do you think that's the track that they were playing in there?
I think so.
Okay, we're good. We're on YouTube.
Enchanted Evening at Disneyland's Trader Sam's. That's what it's called. It's an hour loop. It's really good.
Send it out. Send it out.
Tessa, can you change the room to a panelist?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, Irene says the week of the 15th to the 19th is pretty flexible! Exclamation point. Irene coming in for the win.
Okay, I'm gonna start recording. Slash, we already are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we.
Great.
Okay.
I should be all settled, Tessa, so I know you're probably all good with host, but
I'm set up. Yeah, I think we're fine.
Okay.
The other room seems prettier.
Oh, yeah, but it's
The one-
very large. The like
very large.
forward room.
Oh,
It is a very austere room. I don't know, Tessa, if that's how
Has
you would
some-
describe it.
some window treatments and some carpeting.
I believe we are also now broadcasting live on YouTube, right, Tessa? It looks like.
Yeah, we're on both.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us this morning, May and Marisa. We are just at 10 o'clock. We need to wait for our subcommittee members to arrive before we can launch. Happy Friday.
Just messaged you, Camille.
Great.
Good morning, Thea.
Good morning again.
How
Happy
are
Friday.
Happy Friday.
Since you're the only one with us right now, can I ask you about your calendar and your availability on Wednesday, the 17th? You
Sure.
indicated openness from 1 to 3. By chance, do you have any flexibility for later that afternoon? I think you said you had other meetings booked this week, but any chance you can do 3 to 4, 3 to 4:30?
I could do 3 to 4. I'd have to back out of another meeting, but that's okay. I can be flexible with that one.
It might be the only day where we can get overlap and a quorum, though it looks like Irene has some flexibility. So that might be
Okay,
where we're gonna land.
that's
Or
fine.
on Friday the 19th, if you have any open times from 9 to 11 a.m., if that might
I
be
am
easy. No, okay.
well, I'm in the sub goal meeting from 9 to 11.
Oh, that's right. Oh, shoot. Okay, we're not
I'm fully booked that morning of the 19th.
Okay. So I think we're gonna then likely land on the 17th. We might book 3 to 5, knowing that we'll lose you during the second half. We might not need 2 hours, but I think that's what we'll
I
reserve.
could go till 4:30. I could go till 5. Yeah, I could go till 5. I have to join the last 30 minutes on my phone, but that's fine. I can just,
Okay.
that's not a problem. 3 to 5 is fine.
Wow, we made this happen. Wednesday, the 17th, 3 to 5. Goal 3.
It worked. Well done.
Yeah. I'm trying to do this at maybe 4:30 yesterday afternoon, and I was like, I gotta take a break. I need to. It's not working out. Good morning, Irene.
Good morning. I'm switching to my laptop here.
Perfect. We were just doing scheduling gymnastics with Thea. So it's looking like goal 3, the second follow-up meeting will be Wednesday, the 17th from 3 to 5 p.m. We'll get out a calendar hold to the 5 of you.
Perfect, thank you.
We're not multitasking.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're a couple minutes after 10. Here's Doria, perfect timing, and hopefully we get Lawrence, but we're at quorum. So good morning, Doria. Okay to launch into the front end stuff while folks settle?
Apologies.
No problem. Good morning, happy Friday. All right, I'm gonna go through the spiel here. Let me just close out this window. Okay. Hi, folks. Welcome. My name is Megan Wiley. I'm with Sacramento State University. I provide facilitation support to the task force along with my colleagues from California Strategic Growth Council, Camille Frazier. She's in the conference room if any members of the public would like to join in person today. And Tessa Salzman is also online. Both Camille and Tessa are supporting the meeting and will take notes and generate a meeting summary, and will get posted to our project website, as always, following all task force meetings. This is a meeting of the California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force Restorative Lands Subcommittee. This is a new subcommittee that was just established at the task force's most recent meeting in August. As a quick refresher, the task force was established in the California Budget Act of 2020 by Assembly Bill 179. It's a 13-member body, an independent body, directed to submit a report by January 1st, 2026 to the Legislature and Governor that includes a set of policy recommendations on how to address the agricultural land equity crisis. Task force members are currently working to finalize this report of recommendations by the deadline, so by the end of this calendar year. The report of recommendations is under development right now, following 2 years of meetings, site visits, guest speakers, presentations, and community engagement sessions across California. They've been working hard. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to go over a couple of participation guidelines for our meeting today. These are standard across all of our meetings and they apply to everyone participating: task force members, staff, members of the public, invited guest speakers, etc. In all of our meetings, we respect diverse perspectives, encourage inclusive participation, and agree to use courteous language. So all speakers must be respectful, considerate, and on topic. So today's topic is restorative lands. Together, let's work together to follow these participation guidelines to create a safe, respectful, and inclusive space for meaningful discussion. Thank you all for agreeing to do that today. We do offer 2 public comment moments in today's subcommittee meeting. We've got a public comment process here. If you like, you're welcome to share a comment at one or both or none of these moments, and you can complete a form at this website here, sgc.ca.gov/meetings-events, and you can do a separate form for each item. It's a little bit cumbersome, especially for a short online meeting, so if you're joining us as an attendee, you can also use your raise hand feature on Zoom to indicate you would like to share a public comment. At the appropriate time, you'll see a slide come on screen. Staff will unmute you and call your name and ask for you to share your comment, and we do request that folks adhere to a 2-minute time limit, and I can help keep track with time. And where do you find your raised hand feature? At the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. I think that this icon might be a little outdated. Some folks are finding the raised hands all over the place, it seems. So take a look. Might be under the reactions button, might look like a raised hands for you. Today, you'll also see a chat tool, but that is only for us to message folks if we're running into technical difficulties or help troubleshoot some IT. All of the conversation happens in our room here, our digital room, so to speak. I'll do a quick agenda review and then we'll do a roll call to establish quorum. So we've got 2 hours together. We're scheduled to go until 12, right at lunchtime. And our entire agenda today is a working session. So we'll refresh ourselves on the topic of restorative lands and the discussion points that emerged during the August meeting, as well as some comments, public comments that were received related to this subject. And then you all will have a conversation on the goals and focus of your subcommittee and consider if or how you want to incorporate some of these concepts into your draft report. And before we close out, we will review action items and assign all of our follow-up tasks and deadlines, because we need deadlines because we are working at full speed here, approaching the end. Before we close out, we'll have an opportunity for general public comment if folks want to comment on any of the task force's work in general, not just related to restorative lands, but the breadth of work that they're working on. So that's a plan. And just in time for Lawrence to join us. So I'm going to do a quick roll call for the record here. When I say your name, task force members, please unmute yourselves and say hello or presence, whatever you like. Let's start with member Doria Robinson.
Present.
Member Thea Rittenhouse.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Member Irene De Baracua.
Here. Hello, good morning.
Good morning. And member Lawrence Harlan.
Present.
Excellent. Let's get started. Full quorum. Work in session. So we have just 2 slides to review before we have open conversation, and I am going to ask Tessa to walk us through this refresher of the conversations from August and community engagement.
Thank you, Megan. Before I get into that, I do just want to note that we have one of our advisory committee members, Marissa Raya, on the call. We invited her to listen in and be a source of support for all of you today. If you wish to direct any questions at her, she has closely followed the Truth and Healing Council process and also the Reparations Task Force. And as some of you may remember, does research on land equity issues more broadly. So just to let you know, she's here as a resource if needed. So,
Thank you, Marissa.
yeah, thank you for being here, Marissa. And we'll promote you to a panelist once the discussion gets going if task force members want to ask you some questions. So yes, as Megan said, we just have 2 quick slides. We wanted to remind you of the conversation that happened in the August meeting, and then share some community input that we've received related to restorative lands. So as you can see up here, and as you probably remember from August, there was discussion around a restorative land fund as one idea that some task force members floated. The discussion centered around the desire to not lose track of the unique Black experience and history of slavery, and specifically in California. And comments related to considering recommendations that would specifically serve or meet the needs of ancestors of enslaved Africans, again, in California. And then also part of the conversation touched on the recognition that Native individuals, Native American communities were also enslaved in California, and other communities experienced land theft, and specifically the incarceration of Japanese Americans. And so those are all really big topics, and as you all remember, the conversation was larger than that, but we wanted to just kind of put these key points here to help you remember that conversation. And so now we can go to the next slide, and we wanted to share some community input that was received also related to the topic. So one piece of input was specifically around creating a program for Black farmers to help them resolve heirs land ownership and succession issues. It was noted that there's a USDA, so a federal level program called Heirs Property Relending Program. And so they pointed to that as a potential model. And then there was another comment here, which is, there's a lot in this second comment, but in the context of reparations, they mentioned that there was a need to include dedicated commitments to ensure that there are strong metrics and accountability, dedicated funding, and commitments to cooperative and community ownership models for descendants of enslaved people. So there's a lot in there, like I said, but that was another comment. And then the third one here is adding a recommendation on public education related to slavery in California with the goal of exposing and educating and informing about why land equity is needed. And I know that was discussed in the meeting as well, and that was reflected in the community input. So that's it. It was a really quick overview. If anyone has questions or wants to kind of add to your recollection of the conversation, we really welcome that. And there's some specific questions that we can prompt you all with related to the items that we just discussed on these 2 slides, but kind of just want to pause for a second and see how folks are feeling, and then yeah, we can just open it up for discussion. And yeah, I guess Megan, maybe if you want to go to the next slide, just to give people.
Sorry, Tessa, if I can really quickly, would you mind providing just a tiny bit more context about the input from community engagement sessions, just like a reminder, refresher, what the diverse forms of that engagement was? And if there is any specific context to these that feels important, that might just be, I don't know if anyone would find that helpful, but I think it might be. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think some of the task force members on this call were probably involved in different aspects of this engagement. The first one was from the Central Valley site visits that we did. So that's where that input came from. And if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head, the second one up here is from the public comment written letter that some folks were mentioning on the public meeting yesterday, signed by about 50 community-based organizations and farmers. And then this recommendation on public education also from the Central Valley conversations. And Dory, I know you had really emphasized that during the August meeting. So feel free to clarify and confirm that we captured that properly. And I think maybe one other comment is just, to think through how what you see on the slide here from the community engagement could really relate to the conversation that you had in August. So one example would be this call to create a program for Black farmers that looks maybe like the heirs property relending program of the USDA, thinking about how that could either be embedded within a restorative land fund if that's a direction that you all want to go, or if these types of services that are being called for would actually fit under an existing technical assistance recommendation. So just kind of thinking about what feel like new ideas here, but perhaps maybe they can be embedded in the report.
Thanks for that context.
Yeah, sure. And so, yeah, I mean, our questions for you are really maybe just starting a little bit zoomed out about what the goals are of this subcommittee for all of you. And, once we get through a little bit of that, then thinking through how the ideas that come out of this subcommittee fit into the October draft.
We're a smaller group, so I don't think we need to be super formal with the raised hands necessarily, even though it can get a bit clunky on Zoom. But for now, feel free to just unmute yourself and discuss.
So my first thought is that as an umbrella, I would be interested in bringing forward to the whole task force their proposal of adding a goal of establishing a restorative land fund that has a number of different maybe programs or avenues that people could access funding. One of them could be a California heirs property lending program, relending program. I'd like to look into the USDA's program a little bit more because, sorry, I'm at a place that has very loud clocks. Because I'm not exactly sure if lending is the only kind of way that we would want to go about this. Maybe we would want it to be a grant-based program rather than a lending-based program, or maybe a partial both and kind of thing. I'm just looking at an overview of the heirs property relanding program. Um, and so, maybe there's kind of specific technical assistance, grants and loans, and an educational component that makes sure that people understand the history that has happened in California and why such an effort is necessary. It's like a broad strokes, and then we could get into details more.
How does that land with everyone else? What are you all thinking about this topic and how it can look in the report?
I'm interested in actually in the report, the reparations report. And you mentioned Melissa has been following that, or is it Marissa? I think
Yes.
I'm interested on what that report said specifically about land equity. And yeah, instead of drafting something up totally new, but just kind of basing it off of that foundation.
So do you want to respond to Lawrence's question? I think you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi. Oh. Hi everyone. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me to be here and letting me participate. One really interesting thing about the reparations task force process does make recommendations specific to farming. And the overall, or agriculture, the overall kind of theme is the restoration of Black foodways in California, from the land to the supply chain to the grocery store. But I think one interesting thing to note is that none of the reparations task force public meetings happened in rural or agricultural parts of California. They were all in major cities. So in some ways, I think what I've heard from some Black farmers is that they felt like they didn't get to like fully articulate what they wanted in that process. And so I feel like a little bit of the public comment that that you all are hearing as the task force is people taking their chance to express specifically, what they wanted that they didn't get too much airtime on during the reparations task force. Although the task force did talk at length about Allensworth and about how Black communities in California, Black farming communities, were denied infrastructure and threatened. I think with the focus, what I'm hearing now on heirs property is just on one type of dispossession that the public spoke about during the reparations task force. There were other cases of specific parcels of land lost. So land could be lost through corrupt judges or corruption in the handling of heirs property cases where descendants were forced to sell their land. Land could be lost through towns that were flooded or places that were taken, including farms for through eminent domain to build state infrastructure. But there's also, I think, addressing the type of not dispossession, but exclusion. So that Black Californians were excluded from most of the thriving places in California, including prime farmland and rural agricultural areas, or in the way that in the way that their land was valued or the amount that they had to pay for it had to pay discriminatory amounts to access land. And so I think what you heard, I would interpret the public comment that you heard for the fund as responding to that and as being consistent with the reparations task force.
Marissa, could you say quickly that, thank you, that's all very helpful context, and I don't know if task force members have immediate follow-up, but I'm thinking within the reparations task force, were there then any specific recommendations that would impact land as a particular kind of reparation or as a particular kind of process?
There are, I have about 120 pages written on this, so maybe you could give me a couple minutes to come up with a summary.
Yes, thank you. And whatever, and I had told Marissa did offer to kind of create materials, but as staff, I wasn't sure exactly what you all wanted in this subcommittee meeting. So we can always ask Marissa, not on the spot, for assistance in producing a summary or other kinds of materials that are valuable. Sorry, Doria, go ahead and I see you.
Yeah, I think that getting that summary maybe later, so it's has time to be done well, would be great. I just want to say that we did hear a lot of different types of incidents, not just errors related incidents when we in the different listening sessions. Almost all of the ones that you talked about were all talked about in the different listening sessions. So we're aware. And what I think I was proposing is kind of a broad array of access points for support for people, and not just one, not just an errors, not just yeah. So I'm thinking of proposing a specific fund that is addressing these types of historical injustices, and with the eye of remedying them by helping descendants gain access to agricultural land in order to be farmers, in order to farm or to have cultural practices.
I can chime in on a quick summary if that's still appropriate.
Yeah, I'd like to hear it.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So I think a lot of the reparations task force I will say they had a special consultant group working on economic calculations of the value of land loss. And one of the calculations that they wanted to do but didn't have sufficient data for was the lost business opportunities. So that was sort of one, and business opportunities could include related to real estate or related to land ownership. So that was one significant tract in which the reparations task force talked about land. There also was certainly a lot of discussion about land as a component of identity, as a community or spiritual connection. Not just, I don't want to just overemphasize this sort of economic calculation. There are really detailed recommendations on repairing housing segregation, some of which kind of have overlap or could be translated into how to think about farmland ownership. Things like direct financial assistance to increase ownership, reviewing land use ordinances that were created by historically and currently segregated places, providing restitution for racially motivated takings, providing anti-racism training to real estate workers, people in the industry, and collecting, providing a right to return for displaced African American Californians. Additional policy recommendations in the California Reparations Report include increasing access to green and recreational space through funding land acquisition, environmental justice related recommendations, including funding. It specifically says trees, not urban agriculture, but I think you could make the argument of funding access to green space in red line neighborhoods. And then recommended policies related to mental and physical health, which include food justice and urban agriculture, as well as community health and gathering places.
Thank you, Marisa. That's very helpful. Really appreciate you being here today. I agree with what Lawrence has said to it, and Dory as well, of making sure we're in alignment or referencing or building upon areas that of the reparations task force report. I remember that we heard pretty specifically from the public comments in August that the reparations task force didn't go enough, like it didn't have something specific like a fund like what we're discussing here today. Would you agree with that in terms of like, would that be something as logically would like build upon what's already been written? Or do you think there's some other additional components that we haven't yet discussed here that would fully kind of realize what's been written in that report with a focus on ag? And I hear what you're saying also about not having time to consult with rural communities, and we have done that here. So maybe there's an opportunity, and our focus on tribes as well. So what are your thoughts in terms of the proposal of a fund to build upon that? That's not, sorry. Having a hard time articulating myself. So that would be like a building upon what's in the report, and then also your thoughts of any other areas that we might also consider.
Just checking, you're asking me, Thea, what if there's additional elements that the task force might want to consider supporting from the reparations task force?
I'm just thinking of the fund that we're talking about, and is that a logical? Is it building upon what's there, like what you've just described, and are there other pieces like we have talked about housing? Is that another specific area where they would be like logically building upon what's already in this task force report? That would make sense to include also in our final report.
You mean like cite the reparations task force in your existing recommendation on housing,
Yes.
for example? That one I have to think about a little bit more, specifically housing. I would say that you could lift up, the task force could lift up recommendations from the reparations task force or the Truth and Healing Council, when I guess, although those have not been like officially issued yet. But for example, the reparations task force recommended establishing a California Freedmen Affairs Agency, modeled after the post-Civil War Reconstruction Agency that would it would have multiple roles, including tracking and providing restitution for racially motivated property takings. So there's some alignment there. And it also supports ongoing education and cultural programs, and would, I think, help local governments to sort themselves out on how to address issues of land equity, because in some sense those can be emplaced and distinct from county to county. So I think that if you were asked, that would be the additional one that the task force might want to consider supporting.
Can you repeat the framing for that again? It was a some kind of a organization, agency who researched and did something around racially motivated land.
Yeah. So for full context, I think an important role in the California Freedmen Affairs Agency would be helping Californians distinguish whether or not they're eligible for reparations as recommended by the California Reparations Task Force, because that task force did make a determination of eligibility for a specific group of people whose ancestors had been in the United States for a certain amount of time. And so the one part of the Freedmen Affairs Agency is helping to determine eligibility. The agency is also envisioned, like the Post-Civil War Reconstruction Agency, the U.S. Freedmen Affairs Agency, to track and provide restitution for racially motivated property takings, and to support ongoing local implementation of reparations and reparative policies, as well as education and cultural programs. So they would have a development branch like the California redevelopment agencies used to do that could facilitate real estate transactions. And they could make targeted investment to Black towns such that were underinvested in historically, such as Allensworth, Teviston, Fairmead, Cookiesville, South Dos Palos, and Sunny Acres, the Central Valley towns that were denied investment from the state.
So I feel like I'm trying to figure out how we can connect the work of the reparations task force with the goal of this task force, which is to support Native Californian and uh, um, disadvantaged farmers to get access to land for farming or for cultural purposes. And I'm trying to figure out how to um, look at what was done with the reparations task force and pull out those things that are particular to our mission and make sure they're advancing those things within our mission. It seems to me that the to track and provide restitution for racially motivated property taking experienced specifically by farmers would be a good way of advancing that within the mission of this task force. Um, so if a farmer, in the past experienced racially motivated property taking, that they could go to, you know, this fund, and within that fund there'd be this program where they could, kind of track it, research it, find supporting evidence, and then, put forward um, some kind of a resolution that had to do with um, restoring or finding new adjacent agricultural land. Does that sound like right, or am I off base? Because it feels like because of the mission of this task force, we need to make sure it's in alignment with the mission. Yeah, I'd love to hear feedback from other folks to see if I'm on track or if I'm off track, or if you have something to add to help.
So Dory, you mentioned the racially land that was taken, racially motivated property dispossession. Is that?
Yeah,
But
that's the
it's
language that was used in the
sound
reparations task force, and so I'm repeating it, and wondering.
okay.
Yeah, and I'm repeating what was used was mentioned in what sounds like one of the recommendations from the reparations task force. And I'm asking the question if we can apply that recommendation for the reparations task force to our mission, which is to help, disadvantaged farmers, and I'm not using priority farmers, and California Native tribes gain access to land.
Because I'm wondering if that limits participation to, does that exclude some a descendant of enslaved African American that didn't have land, that maybe wasn't in California, like, but now they are, from participating in any type of land return or land access?
I believe so. I believe that we're talking about wrongs that were committed within California, and would be remedied in California, right?
Okay, so it's not like current, like say a family moved here in I don't know, the 1980s. They wouldn't be able to participate because they weren't wrong in
I
through
don't know
like
that.
land
I don't
dispossession.
know. So if there was something that happened in the 1980s,
Well, no,
racially
I'm saying it didn't happen.
motivated land taking, where they were, they had land and it was, something happened, and they could support that it was a racially motivated land taking, I think that they could then, bring forward their case, and have it play out in the same format. But it would have to happen in California. I don't think that things that happened in Texas or in Louisiana should be brought and remedied in California.
Okay, so there has to be um, proof that it happened in California, and you have to have to participate.
I believe so. I believe that, you would need you know, some kind of instance, some kind of something that happened, right? Um, and proof that it happened in some way. Like, I don't know what that proof could look like, because these things are difficult, and it'd be interesting to hear what the reparations task force was thinking about that. Um, but I think that we're not talking about just general instances of bad behavior, but we're talking about specific instances of bad behavior that was racially motivated and resulted in the loss of land, right? That's very specific. Um, and and then what we're talking about as a remedy is the support of individuals or descendants of individuals who experience that, specific thing. The remedy would be helping them gain access to land, right? For the purpose of farming or cultural, uses.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Irene. Just gonna try to
Thank you.
summarize.
Oh, thanks, Tessa. Do you want to go ahead, or?
No, feel free to jump in.
I was just gonna say, I don't know, does the reparations task force, do they define what racially motivated land taking would be, or is that something we could kind of work on? What constitutes racially, because I think so many things can, right? That some things are disguised as not doing that, but they are, and I'm curious if that was, I'm sure it was maybe in the task force for reparations, right? Sort of defined.
Marissa, do you have a direct, yeah, if you have a direct response, otherwise maybe looking into it in the future.
Yeah, I think the task force heard from I want to say not a small number, but I think the task force felt there were maybe 8 or 10 specific instances where people came to the task force and said, I had this land that I often it was taken through eminent domain. For example, like Bruce's Beach in LA, or instances in Calusa or Sacramento. Some land was flooded, but to build dams or water infrastructure. But I think that the task force felt that the number of racially motivated of things that could be defined as racially motivated takings was significant but small. And I think they were more interested in defining kind of the lost economic opportunity that resulted from exclusion from prime farmland and thriving communities and the underinvestment. So there was more of a reparative policy focus on how to then invest in Black-owned businesses, or in this case, Black-owned farms, and also how to keep education around California history and accountability and support for local municipal reparative efforts.
Well, maybe just to try to summarize from, the last half an hour or so of conversation, it's sounding to me like the task force members are interested in referencing the reparations task force recommendations that are directly related to ag land equity to the extent that those exist. Building on those, perhaps there's like additions to existing recommendations that would orient them more towards ag land equity. And then I'm not sure if this is what you were getting at, Thea, earlier, but I heard in your comments, what are the gaps within the reparations task force, to Marissa's comments earlier, from not focusing that conversation on like the rural agricultural space? What are the gaps there that perhaps this subcommittee could consider filling by adding recommendations to your report? So I want to kind of just get a pulse check if that feels right, because then I think that can direct the path forward.
I feel like we need to have like maybe a different session where we kind of explore like and fully understand what was happening in the reparations task force, and how we can like hear it from its own point first, and then figure out where we can support goals based on our kind of mission of this subcommittee. I feel like there's a few things that we could do today in terms of, creating a container for what this proposed new recommendation or goal could be. And then, by having a more focused session where we're learning more about the reparations task force, we could make our recommendations more specific and kind of refine them or add detail to be better responsive to the whole learning and process that happened with the reparations task force. I wonder if people would be in agreement of kind of setting up a time to just really learn about what happened there, and and now like talk about what this container could look like.
Does that sound to other task force members?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I wish that I had gone over this report more in detail, for those specific things. before now. I do think, because this is the third meeting, third subcommittee meeting this week that I've participated in looking at our different goals. It seems like there could be some areas where we could advance what's in the reparations task force, like Tessa said, where we could advance with some maybe more specifics or reframing to be under our particular focus is the land equity task force. And maybe the fund that you're talking about, Doria, could be within one of, I'm not sure if this is necessarily a separate goal. That's what I'm trying to say here. Maybe this is like more specifics related to the reparations task force that we could fit into our goals. And specifically the fund, I think we've mentioned funds in some of our other sub goals, and maybe we could just be very specific about this one type, and that it is following up on some of the recommendations in the reparations task force that didn't quite go that far or didn't quite address these specific things we've been hearing from farmers and ranchers.
So not totally sold that this shouldn't be its own goal. I
Okay.
want to think about that. But I hear what you're saying. Like, so for instance, yesterday we're in a subcommittee and we were not somebody, a working group, and we were talking about being explicitly about legal technical support. That was specific to title and deeds and things like that, which is very similar to the heirs property lending program. But where this program seems to go further is that it not only supports that technical assistance, that legal aid, but it also supports the acquisition, you know? Um, uh, and it specifically talks about the issue of fractional interests in land, and consolidating ownership, covering legal costs, appraisals, clear title. Like there's a number of different things, so that the land becomes a large enough viable piece that can be kind of worked. Um, I so this is way more detail than just providing legal technical assistance for deeds and property title issues, right? But they're very similar. So I don't know. Um,
Um, I'm just brainstorming here, but so do we need to define, like I always get caught up on who's going to participate in the program or who's eligible. Do we need to define that, worry about that as a task force?
I think the question is, for all of the other recommendations, right? They're either for members of tribal communities or tribal communities, and the people who are falling under our priority farmer category, right? And that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you were a descendant of enslaved people. It has to do with the ways that that term has been defined in law. Um, and so our question is, are we creating a new and separate category that have to do with groups of people who have experienced explicit wrongs that are directly connected to race or race and land loss, you know? So, a separate category that would address the Japanese families who lost their land during World War II as a result of that unfair um, incarceration and kind of taking of land, some by the government, some just by people in the community who, did what they did. Are we creating a separate group for some of the people that we heard about in Bakersfield, where, specific things were done in those communities by individuals that weren't necessarily the government that resulted in their land being lost. That were in these things seem to be racially motivated. And I think that that's the question: is that are we creating a separate category that's around historic wrongs and not around the general um, uh, disproportionate impact of for priority producers? I think is the question.
Just to rephrase, the question is, are we creating a separate category for priority farmers?
No. So are we creating a separate category for individuals or descendants of individuals who experienced a historic wrong to seek remedy in the form of access to land that is separate from like a separate fund that would specifically address these things?
Okay. So yeah, we are, right? We have the tribal nations, and then we're focusing now on descendants of enslaved African Americans.
Well, I mean, it could also be descendants of, Japanese American farmers who, also experience things. There's other groups of people who
Yeah, that's a whole nother
right.
couple hours, right?
Right.
Or at least
Right.
another hour.
Well,
At least another hour for that.
right. So I guess I'm asking the broad question of, our the other goals. So maybe this is Thea's point. And you might correct me if I'm wrong, but the other goals address priority producers, who are possibly also descendants of people who experienced historic wrongs, right? They might be the same people, or they might be different people, or this might be a different situation. Um, I feel like, in the conversation around reparations, there's always this tough conversation about, are you talking about, anybody who is Black, physically appears to be Black and is treated wrongly because of that? Or are you talking about specifically the people who are descendants of people who were enslaved, right? And it creates a separation between, people who experience the general negative effects of a society that doesn't treat people equally. Or are you talking about a specific historic wrong that had specific results and, generational effects? And I think I'm asking that same question now because in the whole of our task force, in the whole of the land equity task force, I feel like we're talking about that general category, right? Of, there's a general situation that happens with priority farmers, that we're talking about throughout the recommendations that is experienced just because of the way our society has been. Like there's a general lack of access, a general of kind of disproportionate impacts. But are we going to also then narrow it down to identify specific historical wrongs within the state of California that we want to remedy separate because there's a smaller group of people probably who experienced some particular thing that had very, historically grounded, evidence-based things that happened to them that were unjust, or that led to the loss of their land, their farm, their whatever. And it wasn't just a general, you know, injustice. I want to stop talking. Does that make sense? I feel like we need to make a decision if we're going to make that specific thing or not.
I think this is also a really important clarifying question for you all. If the restorative land fund and any associated recommendations is specifically for descendants of enslaved Africans, or if to what you were just pointing towards, Doria, a bit more, if it's just the specific historical event for any number of communities, so Japanese who were interned. And so I think that's because I think that's two different things. So that's an important question for you all to clarify, I think probably today. Is this specifically for descendants of enslaved Africans, whatever the recommendations look like? Or is it for other communities who have also experienced that land theft in historical moments and now have ancestors in this state who are feeling those effects? So if possible, that'd be good to hear. Yeah.
I like the idea of the latter the latter one of sort of including various scenarios, right? Of like you mentioned, both of you mentioned. And sorry, in my mind, I'm just thinking a lot about the current systemic, obvious like structures that exist, like in our prison system, right? And so many things that come from obviously this historic like it's a different form of slavery. And so I don't want to exclude folks that have been systemically I guess they've been impacted by various issues, not just I guess I don't know. I'm still thinking. I'm still trying to figure this out, but I do really like that we include more scenarios.
I feel like all of the other recommendations we have apply to those folks, who may want to farm and have experienced those other and are experiencing all of the realm of things that could lead to decreased access to land. So I feel like I want to say that I would be very open to exploring a specific fund that had to do with specific historically uh, evidenced wrongs that led to the loss of farmland. And the remedy being a specific pot of money that was dedicated to the restoration of farmland to those people or to their descendants. I would be open to that. I think that what happens and what we have to address is that oftentimes when we make big buckets that include, all different types of people who might have experienced something like that, what happens with African Americans or Black folks is that we kind of we drop out of those. Like the outreach isn't exactly to us. We don't know about it. We don't access it. We experience some of the same kind of discrimination when trying to access the programs, and things like that. So is there some way, if we were to move forward with such a historical, like a carve out kind of a mission around historic injustices, is there a way to explicitly say that we need to have an explicit kind of outreach culturally competent program, expressly call out and call in African Americans, Black folks, so that folks don't fall through the cracks?
Well, I just want to say, I think this is a conversation that we haven't had yet, and it's the most important conversation of our task force, which is why are we even, why are we assembled as a task force is because of this. It's really trying to get at the historical wrongs that have been committed and what is the appropriate measure and the needed measure to take, because like you said, Doria, it's not like this happened historically. This is still happening in our state. And I hear it all the time. Many people hear, you hear cases of these things happening and it's not always explicit. It's different now. Before it was explicit. Certain policies and programs have deliberately excluded, and now maybe don't deliberately exclude, but I think it points to the need for us to be specific. And I think we could get at that in our recommendations of saying the program shall do this, shall serve, and that we recognize that it's not, that there is a very specific need to make sure that descendants of slavery, those who were formerly enslaved are served, and that outreach and that, fund is specifically to remedy and right that historic wrong. But then also making sure that there are, maybe we include some other examples. And so people who might be applying to this fund will know what that is for. Honestly, I don't know if we can spell out every single detail of that fund, but we can make a recommendation to follow the reparations task force, the work that they started potentially. If it's enough detail, we can also make recommendations that it will do this or will not do that, so that there are, it's substantive enough that it will follow through on what we want to be in there. And I think there's an opportunity to get more into detail about some of those historic instances and current as well, in the discussion of the fund, which I think would add more to our report than is currently.
Another thought I'm having is I'm trying to debate on whether or not this is a separate fund or a part of the funds we've already proposed. I'm sorry, I jumped in, Lawrence, before you I didn't see your hand up. I'll stop. All right. Yeah.
Go ahead before you lose your thought. Go ahead.
So I was thinking that, we talked yesterday in the other working group about being explicit that when we were offering either forgivable loans or reverse amortization, things that were really beneficial to whomever the recipient would be, that they would be connected, that those kinds of advanced things beyond the regular loan, beyond, whatever, would be connected to benefits to the state of California. Benefits in the way on the kind of things that the state of California are undertaking, like, reductions in GHG emissions, climate goals, just restoration of soil kind of microbiome kind of goals, And I wonder if we could also have a category of folks in there who would receive like a forgivable loan or a grant, be people who have experienced, who are descendants of people who've experienced a historical wrong. So they would be eligible for these more aggressive programs that would create more opportunity. That would be a way of not having a separate fund, but rolling it into the existing thing. The fear is that if we do that, and these are only recommendations, they pick up the fund, but they don't pick up that part. And then the whole thing drops out. But if we have a separate fund, they pick up the fund or they don't pick up the fund, So there's my thought.
I had a question kind of more like what Thea was saying, and you, Doria, too. Sounds like, and you can clarify both, but it sounds like Thea was saying make it more inclusive of descendants, not necessarily an evidence wrong descendant of an enslaved person. And then I had a question. I wonder if we make it more broad, to not necessarily an evidence, somebody has the evidence that their property was racially motivated and taken. If we did open it up and made it more general to the population in California that's Black and descendant of an enslaved person, And I was thinking, so they would be just still thinking about eligibility. Did the reparations task force, how did they define those who can participate? Because I was thinking, would someone from another state migrate to California to take advantage of this program? Or reparations specifically?
Yeah.
And then to our program, like what were the consequences of that? Was that considered?
Right. So in the chat, Marissa put in that the California Reparations Task Force divine eligibility restricted to descendants of either an enslaved African American in the United States or a free African American living in the United States prior to 1900.
So then what about the migration question?
Would it-
Somebody could move from Illinois to California and participate?
Um, yeah. I think unless I'm misreading that. I thought it had to do with living in the state of California. But maybe not. That's a Marissa question. And I guess I want to ask one more thing is like, if we make it broad, how is it any different than all the other recommendations that we have, all the other goals? Like, don't all those people qualify under all of the other goals?
Yes, I guess that would be a more of a note that we should, well, I think we're still talking about two things. If we have a fund separate, or if we're rolling in the focus of this, the particular focus of descendants of African American slaves in this country into existing funds that we've already proposed in the report, as more of a call out and specific. And I'm not saying I'm for or against this. At this point, I'm just brainstorming still. But are we further delineating or being more specific about that one particular group and historic injustices, and building on the reparations task force within our current various funds and programs that we've proposed? Or are we creating a standalone goal just for this group? I'm still wrestling with that right now. What's the better path? But you're right. Yes. I think all underserved groups that we've been focusing on in this as a task force would be
eligible under all the other goals, all the programs that we're proposing. And so, I think it's like, so if you give a specific instance, like hypothetical African American farmer who operating in, the Central Valley or the Fresno area, in the early 20th century, due to kind of predatory bank or USDA loans, lost considerable portions of their property, and then their business either diminished or went under. Um, and they feel like those predatory loans was, racially motivated, and that was kind of their thing. And they came and they said, our family has been renting and we really want to actually own land again, and we have this historic wrong. Would they just apply to the regular goals, the regular kind of remedies that we've proposed, and that would be it? Or they would have a special pathway to propose, or different or more kind of remedies because of the historic wrong they experience. And you can maybe apply the same thing to a Japanese American or a Japanese, farmer family who lost their farm during internment. because they were interned and some through some means somebody took that land, and then they would say that, we have been renting land or we wanted to get back into farming, but we haven't been able to, and we're coming to you now saying, we would like to get back into farming. Would they just do the regular things that we had proposed, or would they have a special avenue of redress based on that historical wrong? I think that's the question that we're asking. And then there's other things that are specific to the African American community that we could talk about as well.
I think back to your first question, Doria, like, how is this different? I think it is different if we make it a separate goal and we have a fund specifically for descendants of African slaves. I think it's separate, right? Especially if you have a fund, because it would be limited to that, and it's making it a priority. I mean, the first priority would be, the goals are listed out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the way I see it, goal number 1 is number 1 priority. Goal number 2 is number 2 priority, and it's saying land return to Native American tribes. And goal number 2 is land equity and this land. Okay, we call it land equity fund for descendants of enslaved African Americans. And there's so many historical wrongs in the nation, in the state of California. But I mean, chronologically, those are kind of the 2 original ones. It's
Right.
stolen land and stolen people.
Right.
And that kind of continues that theme.
So
that
if we were to
reparations committee kind of started.
Right. Lawrence, if we were to go with what you just said, and create this number 2 goal based under that, what would the eligibility criteria be? Would we follow the eligibility criteria of the California Reparations Task Force, or would it be something different?
I think so. I think we follow it. I mean, they spent months developing it, and we could consider making it more specific, but personally, I think keep it unless there's a reason not to. Not to keep it as it is. I mean, I don't see a reason why we would shrink that group to be served.
And then the question to staff would be, is there a way that we would need to approach this so that it was Prop 209 compliant?
I think, yes, and Marissa, you might have something to say in response to this, but I know the reparations task force was very deliberate in the way that they approached this. So we would, of course, then do whatever support was needed for that question, Doria. Prop 209 is a California specific law, but of course there are also federal ones that would be important here. So I don't know, Marissa, do you want to say more maybe about how the reparations task force, why that definition is that way, if you have more to say there in relation to the legality?
Yeah, I need to add nuance to the way that I represented, because that is the broad definition of eligibility, but because reparations is specific to specific historic harms, some of the harms for that some of the repairs related to land and property ownership, specifically for harms from housing discrimination, do state that eligibility should demonstrate residency in California for a specific duration of time. So there is both the creation of, or the Reparations Task Force does ask the state to create this new category of people, African American descendants pre-1900. And I believe the state actually followed through on that, and on some of its forms now has, 2 separate categories. And then, but for the policies to address housing discrimination, in as much as there's a cash compensation calculation, it factors in the length of time that the person that would be being compensated in cash for housing discrimination lived in California. So there is that nuance in the eligibility definition there. But I will also say that this is a topic the Reparations Task Force discussed quite a bit. And in reference to the Prop 209 piece, that was the advice from Dean Chemerinsky from UC Berkeley that you create a specific lineage descendant class, and that can hold up to legal challenge. I did note, because I was for a different committee researching states that have right of first refusal laws, and the couple of states that did put forward special rights of first refusal for BIPOC farmers, for example, did end up having to reform those because of the legal challenge. So that, I think my ears perk up when you kind of define a group of eligibility based on descendants of those who lost land through racial discrimination, or I forget the exact phrase Doria used, but I wrote it down in my notes.
Your ears perked up. Why?
Oh,
What was-
because of the phrase that you used. Let me pull it up.
what was the concern?
No, that I think is kind of similar to the legal. I'm going to put it in the chat.
Okay.
The legal definition that the task force, the reparations task force, was advised to put forward.
Right. Like that, this is using this language, I think is what I have heard is more 209 compliant. Yeah.
I'll verbalize that just so not everyone can see the chat. So that language is descendants of Californians who were dispossessed or excluded from agricultural land.
Yeah.
So I am hearing an interest then in maybe going with a very specific request to the legal team, sharing the kind of broad goal here as has been discussed today, and then hearing in relation, Marissa, you mentioned there have been some court cases in other states, right? They have an understanding of protected classes and the legalities around those that I don't have, and I don't know that any of us on this call do. So then maybe coming back with some information from them about what could be done to advance the broader goal that you've all been discussing here. What would it take to create a legally defensible category that could sort of show this historic harm and the need for retribution?
Yeah. If we were to make this a second goal, I'd really appreciate the education element to be included as a part of the goal so that it's clear and understandable why the goal is there. And then one more comment before I turn my mic off again, and that is I do feel like we could add some of the specificity to the heirs what is it called? The heirs property relending program to goal number 3, where we're talking about technical support. We can add some of this particular specificity to that the areas of those the goal number 3. And then finally, we were working separately. Sorry, I said I was going to only say two things, but I want to say another thing. We were working separately on an urban agriculture element, our goal. And, you know, I know that these two things are really deeply connected. And so just wanted to kind of surface that perhaps, either some of the recommendations to live under this goal or the urban agriculture goal should call out, or reference this goal.
Thanks for all of that, Doria. It sounds like you all are moving in the direction of a second goal, focusing on the fund and then adding the educational component as a required extra recommendation in that section. I know there was some back and forth about a new goal versus integrating. So just wanting to pause, I think sounds like sort of the weight of the conversation is moving towards a new goal. And we can kind of draft up that language and show you all what that would look like. And then, revisit this conversation essentially. So if people feel good about us doing that as staff and then coming back and talking about it, I think we can make that happen.
Can I add a couple more things? I feel like
Sure.
if we're gonna, I'm excited about having a second goal or proposing a second goal that would be this. I think that the education kind of sub goal, along with targeted outreach and culturally competent technical assistance. I know we have technical assistance in another area, but naming it under this goal, I think does a lot of work. And supporting community advisory committees to make sure that these voices are heard, even where there are other community advisory committees in existence.
I just wanted to say I'm
Yeah,
in,
go for it.
thanks. I'm in favor of the direction that we're going. And I hope that there's an opportunity for staff to, and maybe in collaboration with Marisa, who is an expert on the reparations task force, that we are able to include the existing language that's in the task force. Very importantly, that language that is protected under Prop 209, I think that will come up here. And when we're vetting with legal staff, that we're doing that across agencies, and potentially even if there were, consulting legal counsel who worked with the reparations task force, I think that would be important to have that interagency understandings of the goal and how there's different opinions across the board. So just wanted to make sure that that is a part of the process. And then otherwise, I think, I don't know if we need to have another meeting on this before October, or if it's just maybe, and then we take this to the full committee in the October meeting.
Thanks, Thea. That was indeed my next question. I think this conversation started with a bit more curiosity about the reparations task force, but it actually sounds like you all have kind of defined a direction already. So I'm wondering if a second meeting is needed, if you feel like that's needed, or if you want to just review the draft language that I just referenced and Thea just added to during the October meeting. Yeah, Irene, go ahead.
So we're no longer looking at the broader, like including Japanese Americans, right? We've narrowed it down to the original.
Yeah, seems like maybe you guys might want to confirm that.
Which I think it's either way is great, right? And I was just wondering if we could maybe in the beginning somehow discuss other, like a focus on this, like educational background or something in the beginning, just to get everyone grounded in terms of Japanese Americans. I'm even maybe including about braceros. There's many farm worker families that came, during the Bracero times, and many of them were forced to leave. And obviously there's different dynamics there, right? But um, so just maybe somehow since we did say the whole purpose of the entire report is focused on the broader so yeah, just trying to see how we could, because I don't know if there any mention of Japanese encampments and those impacted in that way.
You mean in the overview history section or the overview of this new goal too?
Sorry, no, in the overview section in general. I can't recall, sorry, if it's.
Yes, it is there, now. There's I think, too short, given the complex history in this state, but there is a kind of bullet list of some of the instances of historical land theft, and that is included there. And what I'm hearing you say, Irene, is that it will be very important. I think maybe Lawrence, you had said this earlier, the history of racially motivated land loss in California is very complicated, has a long history and a lot of different nuances there. So noting that, making sure that's part of the context, being important, but does not then take away from goal 1 and goal 2 being specific to very particular historical instances of that wrong. So I think it will be, yeah, I'm just hearing it, the need to be very clear that this is not solving the breadth of the challenges or the history.
Yeah. And again, all of the recommendations throughout the task force recommendations apply to all of these different historic groups that had experienced wrongs, right? So, Japanese families who were lost land due to internment, braceros are all eligible under all of the goals, goal 1 through 4, um, and have many opportunities for remedy. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
there's not exclusion, is what I'm trying to say.
Definitely. And I'm sorry, going back to the educational part, Doria, what were you referring to there? Would that be part of this goal or separate?
Like naming it, because I feel like oftentimes, especially when it comes to the Black experience in California, people don't know what that is. They associate kind of racial prejudice only with the American South and don't realize that many practices, many things were happening in the Central Valley and all over California, at Allensworth. There's just so many examples, but they're not known. And so what the common response is that didn't happen in California. We weren't a slave state, or, whatever, but they don't know what did happen. People don't know. And so I think it's important to kind of put, be explicit and put in this goal recommendation, to kind of share that history in California of racial discrimination when it comes to Black farmers and Black folks.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I think that's much needed. And I was just wondering if that was something that we were going to make like a separate goal, and that also include other groups, right? So I just was trying to remember if but you're thinking part of this goal number 2 that could
It could be a thing that's repeated, that because I believe that we already made a recommendation to have it be a goal in general. But I think that it is important to have it specifically under this category. I think that
yeah, and
yeah, from my experience, it's just so often question the legitimacy of the black experience, you know, and you know, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Just to add on that, sorry, this is just making me think of so many things, and then I think, yeah, just in general, in terms of education, right? And especially the Black history in California. I mean, that's there's huge gaps there, but it's just surprising to me that even in our school systems, like the building of missions and the projects, right? But the true history isn't told, and so I think we do cover a lot of that throughout the whole report, and the same with Chicano history or the farm worker movement history and whatnot. And so I think it's a good model to have this very, I think, detailed here in this new goal.
Did you want to jump in? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, so, okay, earlier I said maybe we can just look at this language in October. I'm wondering if, how you all are feeling about moving towards next steps. Seems like we've covered a lot of ground and we might have a way forward. And then I'm also wondering if there would be time for like a 1 hour meeting to look at this language before October. Or finding that that would be helpful.
But before, can we look at the slides again from the public comment? I feel like I want to make sure I didn't miss things that were brought up. So this issue around strong metrics, accountability, um, commitments to cooperative and community ownership models. I wonder if we kind of miss these pieces, and maybe it's not the time now to figure those out. I think we need to figure out, how to talk about this in a way that's compliant, and whatnot. But I don't want to lose this piece around ensuring there's strong metrics and accountability, as well as the commitments to cooperative and community ownership models. I want to lose those elements. I wonder if we can make sure to revisit them in our next conversation if we're going to schedule another hour.
I think that's a good idea, and I remember that we did talk about this yesterday. Maybe there's some language that we can pull from those pieces and then put them under this goal as well to ensure that it's very clear that we talked about program evaluation, we talked about data collection yesterday. I think that the eligibility piece here on cooperative and community ownership, yeah, we'll have to, I think we should talk about that a little bit more. Maybe we have to parse out a little bit who would be, well, we know who the program and fund is eligible for, but that speaks more to if we need to delineate ownership models of the land going forward. If it, if this is going towards purchase of land potentially, but it could also go towards other things. I don't know, we haven't talked about that yet. So I think it's worth more discussion on how we can make sure that fits into a program or a fund, the opportunity for groups of farmers or different members, all of whom might be descendants of enslaved people.
Mm-hmm. We did just, I think, in one of the last working group meetings, call out and emphasize cooperatives, but not necessarily community ownership models. So I wonder if this is a footnote for staff to look for opportunities to also include community ownership models and not just kind of California cooperatives, which is a specific kind of legal entity. And I think we called out, was that yesterday? The difference between marketing co-ops and co-ops that are used for ownership. But again, that's a California cooperative kind of legal entity. And maybe we're also including and encouraging other community ownership models. Yeah. And maybe this is something that happens elsewhere, and maybe is mentioned here. But I know that it already exists in other goals. That piece.
Yeah, I think we heard from the subcommittee yesterday that a request to embed it throughout. So
yeah,
we can
yeah.
do that.
Yeah. I think that the strong metrics and the accountability part is the thing. And I think what that's saying is that, in the effort of in with the goal of we're proposing a strategy that has the aim of 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 kind of targeted impact. And what we need to do is set up mechanisms to measure to see if we're actually meeting that goal, or if or not. Like, are we having the targeted impact that we hope to have? And then having accountability around that. So if we set up this whole goal, it is phrased in such a way where it probably not going to be legally possible to make it, specific in certain ways. And so under the framework that we can work, are we still going to have the impact that we're looking for? Let's make sure we're tracking it and have that embedded in the goal and the language of the goal, the tracking, and accountability. How do we respond if we find, that, this actually gets picked up and somebody tries to do it and then the outcomes are not what the goal was intending? So there's some kind of a redress or a recalculation or, revision to address and continue to try to move towards the intended goal.
I think one thing too that metrics, evaluation, accountability point, which has come up not only with this goal, but I think others as well, is the balance between having enough information now to know the specificity that could be provided versus what mechanisms could be recommended that would get to the level of specificity that is needed. I don't know if I'm saying that very coherently, but I think that's just as you're all thinking about what are the recommendations, like what is the language here? And if I don't at all mean to put off the conversation about what is a metric, what is an accountability measure, but just to note that if that conversation in the time that you have is not going to resolve, what is the recommendation that would ensure that is carried into whatever the next steps are? Just noting that from my own current timeline crunch that's in my mind.
Thanks for that, Camille. I think you're right. Other subcommittees have brought this up and there was a bit of community input as well, pointing in that direction. So sounds like that can be on the agenda for next time we meet. Camille, Megan, how are you guys feeling about next steps? And task force members, how are you feeling about the conversation we had today?
I thought it was a good conversation. We need to work on what is the recommendation. So we know we define the population. and which is good. We said we're going to move it to a goal. Number two, which is good, but what is it? Is it, I'm not clear on what is the recommendation. Is it a land fund only? Or is it this slide?
I do not think it's this slide. I think that there's pieces of this slide in there. So what I have heard, and Camille, I know you're taking notes, so feel free to jump in, but is a fund, some concerted education around why the fund is needed, technical assistance with some of these heirs property issues in mind, in addition to other technical needs. And I might be missing a fourth, but I think Doria, you laid them out quite a few times.
Yeah, so I wrote the kind of other sub things that we would possibly, if you're in agreement, be recommending is one is the fund that's explicit, it has an explicit target, targeted participants. And then two is the corresponding targeted outreach. That's kind of culturally competent outreach, the targeted culturally competent technical assistance, um, and uh, and then education around why all this is even needed in the first place. Education specific to California's history when it comes to these matters.
Thank you, Doria. Very helpful recap.
And then I was also thinking that I always forget the language around that. The heirs property lending program elements could be explicitly added to goal 3 when there's a specific technical assistance call out for legal technical assistance to help with deeds and kind of property holding property. And there's some more, I feel that this program has more specificity in how it accomplishes these things. And I think that we could explore adding that to goal 3 as a part of that legal technical assistance line item.
So it's a fund. How much is the fund? And how much is it per participant? Maybe we start there. And what is it for, the fund?
Well, I'm not sure how much money, I don't know. Should we talk about actual dollars yet? I don't know.
I think it's probably important to note that I don't think any of the other recommendations in your report do. So that would be kind of a new format for this goal.
Right.
We could have a parameter like a minimum. And I also suggest that it could be public-private partnerships to fund, to be able to make sure that this fund is able to be contributed to by multiple entities, public and private partnerships.
That's probably true of all the funds that we're proposing, right?
Yes, well, all of them then,
Yeah.
but particularly this one too. So we're allowing the flexibility for philanthropic dollars to also contribute to this.
I would hope that we do that with all of them, so we're not just saying only this one really needs to depend on private dollars because
Yeah, that's what I was saying. All of the funds.
yeah. Yeah. I do think it's interesting to talk about what the funds could be used for. It I am feeling a certain amount of responsibility to the mission of the task force around land acquisition for agricultural and cultural purposes. And I wonder, because the reparations task force is around lots of other things, wealth building, and things like that, which I think are really important. And I think that wealth building through farming activities is also important. But I do wonder if we want to talk about uses now, or leave it for later?
I mean, it seems like we have a couple minutes. What do you think, Megan and Camille, based on public comment and any other things we need to do to wrap up the meeting?
Happy to take a few minutes to brainstorm uses if valuable. We've got time. It might be putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I don't know. Maybe once we have language where we're looking at like the purpose and goals of the fund, it might be easier to then take that next step and define possible uses. But I also don't know if that's, never mind, I'm not going to finish that thought.
I think it would be for land acquisition, for agricultural land acquisition, and I think it should be kind of like startup funding for a new farmer.
I'd like to amend that if it was acceptable to also include community farms or community stewardship of land for food production as well as other cultural production.
We can draft language based on today's conversation. We will draft language based on today's conversation, including what the sort of 3 things that were maybe just mentioned there by Lawrence and Doria, and then that will come to you all for a review, see if it is achieving the goals you have.
It's also going to need staff support, right, to implement and administer the fund.
Yes, right now, I think any fund that is proposed in the task force's recommendations, there aren't exact dollars attached to those at this point, as Tessa mentioned, but I think most of the language says something like establish and fund blank fund. And I believe from a sort of state perspective, the administrative costs are always part of that establishing cost. But that is something to consider if you do want to propose sort of dollar amounts, just yeah, that might be something that you want to return to, that idea. Thea, were you going to say something?
Well, I just think, and similar to the other programs and funds and departments that we've put into this draft, we should think about where this, what is it under a state agency? Is it administered locally? You know, is it, we should be sure to think about that because that will be helpful, you know, to ensure accountability to make to the next step.
That's great. That's helpful. Adding these to kind of.
We also talked about in the meeting yesterday, kind of asking staff to pull out all of the different recommendations that would require significant staff support and consider, you know, if there's an opportunity to umbrella them under some kind of a program or department or, you know, where it might all be housed, because there's a number of different recommendations that would need support, right? And where do these things live? You know, how could they be sustainable and accountable, you know? So yeah.
Yeah,
So
we'll
I had
that's done by the time you guys meet next too, so that can be part of the conversation. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. I had a question for Marissa again, and I can't say I read the reparations report. I did skim it and flip through most of it. But was there a dollar amount, or how did there was a lot of history and whatnot, so I didn't see a dollar amount. What's the reparation task force? Did they put a dollar amount to it or any type of I thought that's what reparations was money to descendants of enslaved African Americans.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate so much how much as a task force you like take responsibility for other people's ancestors. So I just wanted to thank everybody for modeling that. In the task, my read of the task force was that the media attention of reparations task force, media attention really focused on the calculation of cash compensation. And there was a public there were lots of public comments about cash, but in the analysis that I did of about 35 hours of public testimony at those meetings, there was more conversation about land and things related to land. And there was a lot of desire for non-cash forms of reparations, including but I'll just leave it at that rather than going deep into it. But there was kind of a discussion around the value of self-determination and sovereignty in the Black community in California, not just this kind of cash. The problems from an economic perspective with just a cash compensation is if you don't own the means of production, a cash transfer doesn't reduce the wealth inequality. So many of the economic consultants to the process focused more on how Black Californians could build more ownership of land and businesses. There are some really interesting cash or monetary calculations of the value of certain harms related to incarceration, years being incarcerated, related to the health impacts of discrimination, related to years of housing discrimination, and some other ones suggested related to calculating the lost economic opportunity of not being able to invest in your business. So there are these very interesting cash calculations that were done by some of the best economists in the country, but that wasn't the only kind of focus of what repair means.
All right, folks, I think we need to wind down. Pass it back to Megan.
Right. I was going to say we're just bumped
Thanks.
into the time limit. Well, I feel like we've got some next steps. We're going to check in momentarily on setting up another meeting, but let's just pause. We have one member of the public. May, are you interested to share public comment related to the working session or generally? If so, just go ahead and use your raised hand feature. Okay, doesn't seem like it, but if you need another moment or two to find that, no problem.
There are no submissions to the online form.
Great. So I am wondering about Steph, you're pretty busy in the next couple of weeks, but we also want to get a conversation going, at least to kind of preview some of this language before the October meeting. What do we think about another call the week of September 22nd? Maybe later on in the week? Or would you want to go the following week, the week of September 29th? And if maybe I can ask Camille and Tessa, do you have a preference knowing the internal timelines for turning around an October draft report? It is possible that this, whatever language we get, won't make it into the draft report, of course, because it's not, that hasn't been an agreement by your full task force, but into the briefing packet, or maybe it will need to be shared out with the task force as a supplementary piece a few days before the meeting.
I think ideally not the week of the 29th, the week before, if possible. But
so week of the 22nd.
Depends on people's schedules, yeah.
Generally, should we aim for 1 hour only, or would you prefer more time? I know that there's at least 3 conversation topics that were identified.
I propose at least an hour and a half, just we'll need to approve minutes from this meeting, public comment, things like that. Sorry, Doria, were you going to say something?
I was gonna say a similar thing, although it's so hard to find time. I feel like the longer meetings were really more productive. The hour-long meetings feels like they get started and then they're over.
That's true. Okay, so I will look for a 2-hour time block the week of September 22nd. You all know the drill, especially Dory, Irene, and Thea, since I just pestered you for your calendar a couple of hours ago, but we'll have to look at the next week. So either send me a quick email of your availability or a screenshot of your calendar, whatever works best for you. Week of September 22nd, we're going to try to book a follow-up call for this. Let's see. We've got goal 4 is this afternoon after a short break, 2 to 4. A couple of you might be coming back for that. We did rebook goal 2, which is September 19th. I have to remember to keep updating our slide. And hot off the press, a calendar hold has not even been sent out yet, but goal 3 will be doing a second call on the 17th from 3 to 5 p.m. Goal 1, we're in the process of rescheduling, and I'll hope to confirm that with you, Lawrence, maybe quickly right after this call. This is all happening right before your full task force meeting, October 15th and 16th in Ventura. And task force members, you all received individual email from me to kind of start to coordinate your October travel. So maybe take a peek at that and get back to me with your preferences if you have not already. Boom, 12 o'clock. That was very productive. Thank you, everyone.
Before we close, I just want to give a big thank you to Marissa for joining us and for all the insight that you provided. It was really valuable to have you here. So thank you.
Thanks, Marissa. We hope to have you at the next one too.
Thanks so much. I love your work.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the weekend. You certainly earned it.
Thanks, everyone.